The story of Abraham, revered as the father of many nations, is one of the most compelling narratives in the Bible. His journey from a man with no land or descendants to becoming a patriarch of vast nations is not only pivotal in scriptural history, but also profound in its theological implications. Understanding why Abraham was chosen to hold such a significant title requires a closer look at the divine selection process, the covenant that was established, and the qualities that set him apart. This exploration delves into the reasons behind God's choice of Abraham, shedding light on the divine plan that intertwines faith, righteousness, and sovereignty. Before we dive into this fascinating subject, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more insightful content. If you find this video valuable, please give it a thumbs up and share it with others who might be interested. The religions that worship God, including Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, all have a common ancestor, Abraham. Abraham was a Jew, born in the city of Ur in the Babylonian Empire, now in southern Iraq, near Kuwait in the 20th century BC. Abraham's story begins with a divine call. In Genesis 12:1-3, God commands Abram to leave his country, family, and father's household to a land that God will show him. God promises to make Abram into a great nation, bless him, and make his name great. This covenant between God and Abram is significant, as it establishes Abram as the father of many nations and a key figure in God's redemptive plan. Abraham was originally named Abram in Hebrew Avram, which means the father is exalted. His wife was Sarai, meaning my princess. In Genesis 12:2, God first made a promise to Abram to bless him and make him into a great nation. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. God further emphasized his promise in Genesis 15:5. He took him outside and said, "Look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them." Then he said to him, "So shall your offspring be." In Genesis 17, God again appeared before Abram and made a covenant with him, which he would abide by with Abraham's posterity. Abraham unquestioningly honored all the requirements that God made, including male circumcision, which would be an outward sign of the covenant between God and his children. Additionally, God promised Abram that he would be the father of many nations, Genesis 17:4, and accordingly changed his name to Abraham Avraham in Hebrew. God also changed Abraham's wife's name to Sarah, meaning princess. Its regal connotations reflected that kings, including Jesus Christ, would be born from her lineage. Additionally, Sarah, as Abraham's wife, would be the mother of all nations through the son she would bear him, Genesis 17:16. When their son Isaac was born, Abraham was 100 and Sarah was 90 years old, respectively. Abraham was born in Ur in the Chaldees. Although the Bible explains little of his life up until the age of 70, Joshua 24:2 reveals that Abraham resided in Mesopotamia, where his father Terah was engaged in polytheism. Although we do not know whether Abraham had engaged in the same idolatry practices as his family in his earlier years, and to what extent, we do know that Abraham exhibited great faith in God. His steadfast faith, his unquestioning obedience, and his constant seeking of God are believed to be why God chose Abraham. He was the first patriarch of the Hebrews, and ultimately the rest of the nations. This is evident in Genesis 12:1-6, when Abraham obeyed God's call to leave Mesopotamia and travel to Canaan with Sarah, his nephew Lot, and their entire possessions. Hebrews 11:8 states, "By faith Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going." In Genesis 22, Abraham passed a significant test of obedience when he was prepared to sacrifice his son at God's command. As Abraham reached for his knife to slay his son, God stopped him and reiterated his promise that his progeny would be many, and that through them, all the nations on earth would be blessed, Genesis 22:16-18. God's grace and Abraham's unwavering faith fulfilled the covenant promises that Abraham and his descendants would be blessed by. Therefore, the promise comes by faith, so that it may be by grace and may be guaranteed to all Abraham's offspring, not only to those who are of the law, but also to those who have the faith of Abraham. He is the father of us all, Romans 4:16. According to the Bible, reflecting the change of his name to Abraham, meaning a father of many nations, Abraham is considered to be the progenitor of many nations mentioned in the Bible. Among others were the Israelites, Ishmaelites, Edomites, Amalekites, Kenizzites, Midianites, and Assyrians. Through his nephew Lot, he was also related to the Moabites and Ammonites. The lineage of Isaac and the Israelites. The lineage of Isaac and the Israelites traces the continuation of the divine promise made to Abraham, highlighting the fulfillment of God's covenant and the establishment of the Israelites as God's chosen people. Isaac, the son of Abraham and Sarah, plays a central role in this narrative, serving as a link between Abraham and the Israelite nation. The Jewish people are very proud to call themselves the children of Abraham, but are of the line of Isaac, the son of Abraham and Abraham's first wife Sarah. As had been prophesied in Mamre, Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham on the first anniversary of the covenant of circumcision. Isaac was born to Abraham and Sarah when they were advanced in age, fulfilling God's promise to Abraham that he would have a son through Sarah. The birth of Isaac is recorded in Genesis 21:1-3, where it is stated that the Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had promised Isaac's name. Meaning he laughs reflects both Sarah's initial disbelief and the joy brought by his birth. Abraham was 100 years old when his son, whom he named Isaac, was born, and he circumcised him when he was 8 days old. For Sarah, the thought of giving birth and nursing a child at such an old age also brought her much laughter, as she declared, "God hath made me to laugh, so that all who hear will laugh with me." Isaac continued to grow, and on the day he was weaned, Abraham held a great feast to honor the occasion. During the celebration, however, Sarah found Ishmael mocking an observation that would begin to clarify the birthright of Isaac. Isaac's role as the promised son underscores his importance in the fulfillment of God's covenant with Abraham. As the heir to the covenant, Isaac inherits the promises of numerous descendants and the land of Canaan. His life is marked by events that emphasize the continuation of Abraham's faith and obedience to God. One of the most significant events in Isaac's life is the binding of Isaac, also known as the Akedah, found in Genesis 22:1-19. In this narrative, God tests Abraham's faith by commanding him to sacrifice his son Isaac. Despite the apparent contradiction to God's promise, Abraham obeys, demonstrating his unwavering trust in God's plan. At the last moment, an angel of the Lord intervenes, preventing the sacrifice and providing a ram as a substitute. This event not only underscores Abraham's faith but also highlights Isaac's role as the bearer of the covenant. The binding of Isaac is a pivotal moment that reaffirms God's promise and foreshadows future sacrifices and acts of faith within the Israelite tradition. For his obedience, he received another promise of numerous descendants and abundant prosperity. Isaac's marriage to Rebekah is another crucial event in the continuation of Abraham's lineage. In Genesis 24, Abraham sends his servant to find a wife for Isaac from among his relatives in Mesopotamia, ensuring that Isaac's descendants would remain distinct from the surrounding Canaanite peoples. Rebekah's selection as Isaac's wife is marked by divine guidance, as she fulfills specific signs requested by Abraham's servant. Rebekah's role in Isaac's life is significant, as she becomes the mother of Jacob and Esau, furthering the covenantal lineage. Her marriage to Isaac signifies the continuation of God's promises, and her actions in the narrative highlight the importance of divine providence in fulfilling the covenant. Isaac and Rebekah have twin sons, Jacob and Esau, whose births are recorded in Genesis 25:19-26. The narrative highlights the rivalry between the brothers, with God declaring to Rebekah that 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you shall be divided, the one shall be stronger than the other. The older shall serve the younger, Genesis 25:23. This prophecy foreshadows the struggles between Jacob and Esau, as well as the future nations that would descend from them. Esau, the elder, is a skilled hunter, while Jacob is described as a quiet man who dwells in tents. Their rivalry culminates in Jacob's acquisition of Esau's birthright and blessing, events that underscore the theme of divine election and the continuation of the covenant through Jacob. Jacob's life is marked by significant events that shape the Israelite nation. After receiving Isaac's blessing, Jacob flees to his uncle Laban's household to escape Esau's wrath. During his journey, Jacob has a vision of a ladder reaching to heaven, with angels ascending and descending. In this vision, God reaffirms the promises made to Abraham and Isaac, assuring Jacob of divine protection and blessing, Genesis 28:10-22. Jacob's time with Laban is characterized by struggles and conflicts, yet he prospers and becomes the father of 12 sons, who become the patriarchs of the 12 tribes of Israel. Jacob's name is changed to Israel after wrestling with the divine being, Genesis 32:22-32, symbolizing his transformation and the establishment of the Israelite identity. Jacob's 12 sons form the foundation of the Israelite nation. Each son becomes the progenitor of one of the 12 tribes, which play a crucial role in the history and development of Israel. The tribes are named after Jacob's sons Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. The descendants of Jacob's sons are instrumental in the fulfillment of God's promises, as they grow into a great nation and eventually settle in the Promised Land. The tribes' journeys, struggles, and triumphs are central to the biblical narrative, highlighting themes of faith, obedience, and divine providence. Joseph, one of Jacob's sons, plays a pivotal role in the survival and prosperity of the Israelite nation. Sold into slavery by his jealous brothers, Joseph rises to prominence in Egypt due to his ability to interpret dreams. His story is detailed in Genesis 37-50, where his faithfulness and wisdom lead to his appointment as a high-ranking official in Pharaoh's court. During a severe famine, Joseph's foresight in planning saved Egypt and the surrounding regions from starvation. His family, including Jacob and his brothers, moves to Egypt, where they are reunited and settled in the land of Goshen. This migration sets the stage for the Israelites' eventual enslavement in Egypt and their subsequent liberation in the Exodus narrative. The Israelites' time in Egypt is marked by both prosperity and oppression. Initially welcomed and protected due to Joseph's influence, the Israelites grew into a large and prosperous community. However, a new Pharaoh, who does not know Joseph, rises to power and enslaves the Israelites, fearing their growing numbers and potential threat. Exodus 1:8-14. The Israelites' suffering and cries for deliverance lead to God's intervention through Moses, who becomes their leader and liberator. The Exodus, the journey from slavery to freedom, is a foundational event in the Israelite identity, highlighting themes of redemption, divine intervention, and the fulfillment of God's promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The Arab Muslims also claim to be descendants of Abraham, but of the line of Ishmael, the son of Abraham, and his concubine named Hagar. Abraham's legacy as the father of many nations includes his lineage through his son Ishmael, whose descendants are traditionally associated with the Arab nations. This aspect of Abraham's story is significant both historically and religiously, as it connects Abraham to a broad array of peoples and cultures beyond the Israelites. The birth of Ishmael is recounted in Genesis 16. Abraham's wife, Sarah, was unable to bear children for a long time, which was a source of great distress. In an attempt to fulfill God's promise of descendants, Sarah gave her Egyptian maidservant Hagar to Abraham as a concubine. This practice was culturally acceptable at the time as a means of providing heirs. Hagar conceived and bore a son, Ishmael. Genesis 16:10-12 records the angel of the Lord's prophecy to Hagar about Ishmael's future. "I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count. You are now pregnant, and you will give birth to a son. You shall name him Ishmael. For the Lord has heard of your misery. He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, and he will live in hostility toward all his brothers." This prophecy foretells the significant impact Ishmael will have as a progenitor of a great nation and hints at the tensions and challenges his descendants will face. Ishmael is traditionally considered the ancestor of many Arab tribes. His name, which means God hears, reflects God's response to Hagar's plight and signals the beginning of Ishmael's legacy. Although Ishmael is not the child through whom the primary covenant with Abraham would be fulfilled, that role belonged to Isaac, he is still blessed by God to be the father of a great nation. Genesis 17:20 states, "And as for Ishmael, I have heard you, I will surely bless him, I will make him fruitful, and will greatly increase his numbers. He will be the father of 12 rulers, and I will make him into a great nation." This blessing highlights God's intention for Ishmael to play a significant role in Abraham's lineage, underscoring the promise that Abraham would indeed be a father of many nations, including those that would come through Ishmael. Ishmael's descendants are listed in Genesis 25:12-18, which details his 12 sons, known as the Ishmaelites. These 12 sons became the heads of 12 tribes, paralleling the 12 tribes of Israel descended from Jacob, Isaac's son. The Ishmaelites settled in the region stretching from Havilah to Shur, near the border of Egypt, toward Assyria. These tribes are often associated with various Arab groups, highlighting the connection between Ishmael and the Arab nations. Historically, the Ishmaelites are known for their nomadic lifestyle, trading activities, and interactions with the Israelites. This connection is particularly evident in the story of Joseph, who was sold into slavery by his brothers to a caravan of Ishmaelite traders, Genesis 37:25-28. In Islamic tradition, Ishmael, known as Ismail in Arabic, is considered a prophet and an important figure in the ancestry of the Prophet Muhammad. The Quran refers to Ishmael as a righteous and obedient servant of God, and he is honored for his role in establishing the Kaaba in Mecca with Abraham. In the Islamic narrative, the willingness of Abraham to sacrifice his son, a story parallel to the biblical account involving Isaac, is often associated with Ishmael. This event is commemorated during the annual Eid al-Adha festival, highlighting the themes of faith and submission that are central to both Abraham and Ishmael's stories. Ishmael's legacy in Islam is profound, as he is seen as a patriarch of the Arab people and a link in the chain of prophets leading to Muhammad. His story underscores the unity of monotheistic faiths and the shared heritage among Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The association of Ishmael with the Arab nations is supported by various historical and genealogical traditions. His descendants are believed to have settled across the Arabian Peninsula, influencing the cultural and social landscapes of the region. This connection is significant because it extends Abraham's influence beyond the Israelites, highlighting the widespread impact of his lineage. Ishmael's legacy is frequently seen as one of resilience and independence, reflecting the character described in the prophecy of Genesis. The Ishmaelites' interactions with other nations, including the Israelites, illustrate the complex relationships between these groups throughout history. After the death of Sarah, Abraham took another wife, a concubine named Keturah, by whom he had 6 sons: Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. Zimran, the descendants of Zimran, are not extensively documented in the Bible. Some historical and biblical scholars speculate that his lineage may have settled in the Arabian Peninsula. However, concrete evidence about his descendants and their influence remains sparse. Jokshan fathered Sheba and Dedan. These names are significant, as they are associated with regions and tribes in the Arabian Peninsula. Sheba, the land of Sheba, is frequently mentioned in the Bible, often associated with wealth, trade, and spices. Sheba is famously connected with the Queen of Sheba, who visited King Solomon, bringing gifts of gold, spices, and precious stones. This suggests that the descendants of Sheba were involved in trade and commerce, contributing to the cultural and economic landscape of the region. Dedan is also mentioned in several parts of the Bible, often in connection with trade and commerce. The descendants of Dedan likely settled in areas around the Arabian Peninsula, playing roles in the region's trading networks and contributing to its cultural exchanges. Little is known about Medan and his descendants from the biblical text. However, like the other sons of Keturah, they likely played a role in the settling of regions within the Arabian Peninsula, contributing to its demographic and cultural diversity. Midian, among Keturah's sons, Midian is the most prominent in the biblical narrative. The Midianites are frequently mentioned in the Bible, interacting with the Israelites in various contexts. The Midianites are depicted as a nomadic tribe that inhabited the northwestern regions of the Arabian Peninsula and southern Jordan. They were involved in trade and commerce, as seen in the story of Joseph, who was sold to Midianite traders by his brothers, Genesis 37:28. The Midianites were also significant in the story of Moses, who fled to Midian after killing an Egyptian and married Zipporah, the daughter of Jethro, a Midianite priest, Exodus 2:15-21. The Midianites had a complex relationship with the Israelites, at times adversarial and at times allied. During the time of the Judges, the Midianites oppressed the Israelites until they were defeated by Gideon, Judges 6-8. Their presence in the biblical narrative underscores the interconnectedness of the peoples in the region and the diverse lineage stemming from Abraham. Ishbak, like Zimran and Medan. Ishbak's descendants are not extensively documented. They likely settled in regions of the Arabian Peninsula or surrounding areas, contributing to the ethnographic landscape without prominent mention in later biblical texts. Shua, the descendants of Shua, are also not well documented in the Bible. However, there is a reference to Bildad the Shuhite, one of Job's friends, suggesting that the Shuahites may have been a tribe within the Arabian Peninsula or nearby regions. Christians of European or Asian origin have no blood relation to Abraham, but because Christianity and Islam both originated from Judaism, Christians also regard Abraham as a father. Why was Abraham chosen to be the father of all nations? Why did God choose to bless a mere man with multitudes of descendants, who would in turn also be blessed? In Galatians 3:29 it states, "If you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's seed, and heirs according to the promise." God's plan to bring his gift of salvation to mankind through his Son began with Abraham. He was the root of man's redemption, through which the genealogy of Jesus Christ would be established. The most fundamental reason for Abraham's selection is his extraordinary faith and obedience to God. The scriptures consistently portray Abraham as a man who trusted God deeply, even when facing significant challenges and uncertainties. This trust is most famously exemplified in the story of the binding of Isaac, where Abraham is willing to sacrifice his son Isaac at God's command. One of the most defining moments in Abraham's life is his response to God's call and the promise of becoming the father of many nations. This promise, given in Genesis 12:1-3, marks the beginning of Abraham's journey as the patriarch. God instructs Abraham to leave his homeland, his family, and his father's house to journey to an unknown land that God will show him. Despite the uncertainty, Abraham's immediate departure signifies a profound trust in God's guidance and promises. Abraham's faith is highlighted in Genesis 15:5-6, where God reaffirms his promise to Abraham, saying, "Look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. So shall your offspring be." The passage continues, Abram believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. This declaration underscores that Abraham's faith in God's promise was counted as righteousness, setting a precedent for understanding faith as a fundamental aspect of righteousness in the biblical tradition. Abraham's faith is tested repeatedly throughout his life, and his responses demonstrate unwavering obedience to God. One of the most profound tests comes in Genesis 22:1-18, where God commands Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac, the child of promise. This command is a significant test of Abraham's faith and obedience. The narrative recounts Abraham's willingness to comply, demonstrating his absolute trust in God's promises, even when faced with a seemingly contradictory directive. Abraham's faith is so resolute that he believes God could raise Isaac from the dead if necessary, as suggested in Hebrews 11:17-19. The story reaches a pivotal moment when, as Abraham is about to sacrifice Isaac, an angel of the Lord intervenes, providing a ram for the offering instead. This intervention affirms Abraham's faith and obedience, and God reiterates his covenant promises, blessing Abraham for his unwavering trust. The event is a powerful testament to Abraham's willingness to follow God's commands, reinforcing his role as the father of faith. Abraham's faith is not merely a passive belief but is actively demonstrated through his actions. His decision to leave his homeland without knowing his final destination, as described in Genesis 12:4, exemplifies his commitment to God's plan. Abraham's willingness to relocate and live as a foreigner in a new land illustrates his trust in God's promise of making him a great nation. Furthermore, Abraham's interaction with Melchizedek, king of Salem, in Genesis 14:18-20, reflects his understanding of and respect for God's sovereignty. When Melchizedek blesses Abraham and receives a tenth of the spoils from Abraham's victory, it signifies Abraham's acknowledgement of God's providence and blessing in his life. Abraham's faith is also evident in his adherence to the covenant God established with him. In Genesis 17, God expands on the covenant, promising that Abraham will be the father of many nations and establishing circumcision as a sign of this everlasting covenant. Abraham's acceptance of this sign and his subsequent obedience to God's command to circumcise himself and his household highlight his commitment to the covenant. This covenant relationship is foundational to Abraham's role as the father of all nations. It represents not only the promise of numerous descendants, but also a deep, abiding relationship between Abraham and God. The covenant underscores the notion that Abraham's faith was not only in the promise of many descendants, but also in a profound and enduring relationship with God. The theological implications of Abraham's faith are profound. In the New Testament, Abraham is frequently cited as a model of faith. The Apostle Paul, in Romans 4:16-17, highlights Abraham's faith as how he was justified and blessed. Paul writes, "Therefore the promise comes by faith, so that it may be by grace and may be guaranteed to all Abraham's offspring, not only to those who are of the law, but also to those who have the faith of Abraham." This passage underscores that Abraham's faith is a model for all who believe, transcending ethnic and legalistic boundaries. Abraham's faith is also pivotal in the context of Christian theology. In Galatians 3:7-9, Paul explains that those who have faith are children of Abraham, linking the promise made to Abraham with the broader promise of salvation through faith in Jesus Christ. This connection emphasizes that Abraham's faith serves as a precursor to the faith required of all believers, and highlights the continuity of God's plan for humanity. One of the most significant reasons for Abraham's selection as the father of many nations is the covenant relationship established between him and God. This covenant is a pivotal moment in the biblical narrative, marking a new phase in God's plan for humanity. In Genesis 15, God formalizes his covenant with Abraham. The chapter begins with God speaking to Abraham in a vision, reassuring him not to be afraid. God promises Abraham a reward that will be as numerous as the stars in the sky, signifying countless descendants. Abraham, despite his advanced age and childlessness, believes in God's promise, and this faith is counted by him as righteousness. Genesis 15:6. This foundational act of faith is critical, as it establishes Abraham as a model of trust and righteousness in the eyes of God. In Genesis 17, the covenant is further formalized and expanded. God changes Abram's name to Abraham, meaning father of many nations, and promises that he will indeed be the father of numerous nations and kings. This covenant includes a significant sign, circumcision, which Abraham and his descendants are to observe as a perpetual symbol of their unique relationship with God. Genesis 17:10-14. The covenant's promises are not only for Abraham's immediate descendants but extend to all nations, reinforcing his role as a patriarch of a multitude of peoples. This covenant is characterized by both divine promises and human obligations. God promises land, descendants, and blessings, while Abraham is required to uphold the covenant sign of circumcision and live according to God's commands. This two-sided agreement underscores the deep and binding relationship between Abraham and God, setting a precedent for future covenants and illustrating the divine commitment to fulfilling his promises. Abraham's selection is also deeply rooted in his righteousness and integrity, which are depicted as exemplary qualities in the biblical narrative. His righteousness is demonstrated through his unwavering faith and ethical behavior. In Genesis 18:19, God says of Abraham, "For I have chosen him so that he will direct his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right, and just so that the Lord will bring about for Abraham what he has promised him." This verse highlights that Abraham's righteousness is integral to his role as the father of many nations. He is expected to lead his household in following God's ways, demonstrating a commitment to justice and righteousness that aligns with divine expectations. Abraham's righteousness is also evident in his interactions with others. For example, in Genesis 18:22-33, Abraham intercedes on behalf of Sodom and Gomorrah, pleading with God to spare the cities if righteous people can be found there. His willingness to challenge God's plan reflects his deep concern for justice and mercy, qualities that are consistent with his faith and integrity. Additionally, in Genesis 14, Abraham's rescue of Lot from captivity shows his bravery and sense of justice. He leads a daring rescue mission to save his nephew, demonstrating his commitment to family and righteousness. This act not only highlights his moral character but also his leadership qualities, which are essential for his role as a patriarch. Abraham's selection as the father of many nations ultimately reflects God's sovereign choice and divine will. The Bible presents this choice as part of a larger, overarching plan that God has for humanity. God's decision to choose Abraham is not based on Abraham's merit alone, but on divine purpose and grace. In Genesis 12:1-3, God calls Abraham to leave his homeland and promises to make him a great nation, bless him, and make his name great. This call and promise are part of a divine plan to bring blessings to all nations through Abraham. The choice of Abraham is a demonstration of God's sovereign will, choosing him to fulfill a specific role in the unfolding of his plan for humanity. This divine choice is also a reflection of God's grace. The selection of Abraham is not based on his inherent qualities, but on God's unmerited favor and purpose. In Romans 4:16, Paul explains, "Therefore the promise comes by faith, so that it may be by grace, and may be guaranteed to all Abraham's offspring, not only to those who are of the law, but also to those who have the faith of Abraham." This emphasizes that Abraham's role is part of a larger plan that extends beyond his immediate descendants, reflecting God's broader purpose for redemption and blessing. Additionally, in Galatians 3:7-9, Paul asserts, "Understand, then, that those who have faith are children of Abraham." Scripture foresaw that God would justify the Gentiles by faith and announced the gospel in advance to Abraham. All nations will be blessed through you, so those who rely on faith are blessed along with Abraham. The man of faith. This passage underscores the significance of God's choice of Abraham as a means of extending blessings to all humanity, highlighting the universal scope of God's plan. The selection of Abraham as the father of all nations is a profound testament to God's sovereign plan and his grace. Through the covenant relationship, Abraham's unwavering faith and righteousness, and the divine choice, we see a man chosen not merely for his own sake, but as a conduit for God's promises to humanity. His life stands as a powerful example of trust in divine promises and the fulfillment of God's plan to bless all nations through one man. As we reflect on why Abraham was chosen, we gain insight into the broader narrative of redemption and the scope of God's blessings. which extend far beyond Abraham's immediate descendants to encompass all of humanity. If you enjoyed this exploration into Abraham's role, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more content on biblical topics. Like this video to support our work, and share it with friends and family who might find it inspiring.